All right, it's time for another update and forecast on the park fire. I actually just did this update for about 30 minutes and I realized that I hadn't clicked go on my live streaming software. So hopefully that just means I now understand the entire situation and I'll be able to kind of communicate it to you a lot more clearly and concisely than I usually do. So here's the park fire. We'll just start off with the numbers. 428,000 acres, 34% containment, but as we've talked about, those numbers don't actually tell us all that much. So what we're going to be doing throughout the course of this video is trying to answer kind of three different questions. Where is the fire? What is the current situation? And where is the fire most likely to spread in the future, if at all? So with these three different sections, I'm going to put the timestamps for them in the top comment. I'll pin it to the comments. And if you're only, let's say, interested in the wildfire forecast, you can just click directly to that one. But without further ado, we'll try to answer this first one. Where is the fire? So we'll start off somewhat generally, just in case you're not familiar with the area. And then we'll really zero into where some of the recent growth has been. So there's Chico down to the south, Red Bluff to the west, Manton and Shingletown to the north, Butte Meadows to the east, Paradise and Magalia to the southeast, and what I saved for last is the two communities that we have been concerned about recently, which is Mineral and Mill Creek. And the reason I say that is because it's really only this northeastern finger where we have seen growth recently. A lot of that blue was the first week of the fire, and they've been mopping up around the northwest and south since then, but we've really seen almost no activity there in quite some time. Where you see the orange and the red, that's where your more recent growth has been. And by that I mean this week. It kind of quieted down in the second week of the fire. This week it's been extending up here, and where you see the red is a little sneak preview of where some of that more recent growth has been. So I think that's the spot to focus on. We're just basically going to be talking about this northeastern finger for the rest of the video. First thing we can do, I always like to do this, just click on and off between the perimeter data that we have to work with today and the one we were looking at yesterday. Right off the bat, you see three areas of growth. Looks like that area filled in where we had that firing operation close to Mineral. Looks like we had what at first looks like growth towards the northeast, but as we dive in closer there, we'll actually see that is more likely to be a firing operation. And then we did have this growth down close towards Turner Mountain. And that's actually the one that we are going to talk about first. Because if we look at Watch Duty, great website and app, I'd strongly recommend it. Here's this sentence right here. This is from 4 p.m. yesterday. Fire has slopped over a primary control line just south of Turner Mountain and is making a run towards the ridge line. So what they're talking about there is they had a control line on this side of the fire, and then look as we turn, we've now zoomed in and on and off, it got past the control line. And then what they mean is making a run towards the ridge line. That's why this is, I would say, the area of the fire where I am expecting the largest amount of growth today, is because when you look at it, this fire is now established at the bottom of Turner Mountain, and fire likes to go uphill because it's able to preheat the fuels. And it doesn't look like it's only on that side. It also looks like it's on this side as well. Both of those going uphill. And as we've talked about in the past, a lot of fuel here that hasn't burnt out in decades. We could look at that on the fire history map right here, showing fire history. Turner Mountain is going to be in here. No fire history. So there's going to be a lot of fuels. It's also been very dry recently. So that's, I would say, the spot where I am expecting more growth throughout the day today. Now the other two spots that we saw increase since yesterday's perimeter are close towards Mineral and up north of Mill Creek. Now the first thing I will say is if you look at the perimeter itself, it doesn't actually get closer towards Mineral. We just see it fill in a little bit there, and that's not exactly a big deal because as long as that line holds near Mineral, we're in a pretty good spot, and that part of the fire would also have to go downhill and through this meadow to get to Mineral, which one of the people commenting said that this stays pretty green all year round, which means there's a lot of moisture in it. There's also just less fuel. You're not seeing the dense timber right there. So personally, I'm not too concerned about Mineral from this part of the fire as of right now. And then when we look over at Mill Creek, it was quite a close call right there. But amazingly, they kept it out of, you see Mill Creek Resort right there. They actually did a firing operation, cleared out the fuels ahead of time so that when the main fire got there, it wasn't going to just rush through Mill Creek Resort. And I believe that's actually what this new growth on the northeastern fire is as well. At first, it looks like, oh, the fire kind of spilled over 172 and then it's just been going crazy right here. But when you zoom in, you see that it's actually right along a road. And then it's also kind of weirdly shaped. Whenever you see that, it's a very good indication that they actually lit fire on purpose when the conditions were more favorable to protect some of the structures in the area and to reduce continued growth moving forward. Now, one other thing that you might have noticed on the fire history is on that northeastern side, I'm not too concerned about that because let's go just perimeters here. If that were to continue, it's just going to go into the Dixie Fire burn scar. And when we look at the Dixie Fire burn scar, that's what it looks like. There's a lot of fuels that burnt out of there. So fire would not have even close to the kind of activity we've seen in previous days as it moves in to where those fuels have recently burned out. I believe the Dixie Fire was in 2021. So 3 areas where the fire appears to be burning right now. And I think that kind of wraps up where the fire is. So with that being done and taken care of, we can now go on to the next one, which is current situation. So with current situation, I had accidentally kind of showed you a sneak peek of it, but the first thing I always do for current situation, it's actually the first thing I check in the morning, is I look at how many red stars do we have. That's going to show the heat within the last 12 hours. This is why I'm not talking about the northwest or south parts of this fire, because we haven't seen really any heat there recently. And then up here you see Turner Mountain, where it filled in around Mineral, and then where it looks like we had that firing operation. Now, one thing I will say about that is it looks pretty good on this northern side. So we saw that it goes right along the road right there, which makes us think that that was a firing operation. But also notice on this northern side, well, we've maybe had a few spots go over 36. Right now, it looks like it's holding on 36. And that's really good news because north of 36, looking at the fire history, is an area where if the fire were to go to the north, that would be a problem because the fuels haven't burnt out there, and then there's a lot of fuels north of there that haven't burnt out. So you know that that's one of their top priorities today, is just keeping it contained right in there. But then again, northeastern side, that's going to push into the Dixie Fire. So also with current conditions, we can look at what it actually looks like right now and compare it to previous days. Going back to the beginning here, first thing I noticed, look at all the smoke that's settled down into valleys. You could also see that from the satellite imagery as well. Earlier this morning, when this loop resets, look at all that smoke that settled into the Mill Creek drainage. Since then, though, it's starting to clear out, and you're seeing a little bit more activity on that plume right there. So we'll let this one play out. First thing I notice, not as active as previous days. In previous days, I was recording live streams about the same time, and we were seeing those big pyrocumulus clouds. This, I mean, it's definitely still active, but it's like nothing we've seen in the past. And a big part of the reason for that is that smoke that settled down overnight, and a big reason for that is our weather. So looking at the current weather stations, these are actual stations on the ground, it's not model data. First thing I notice, we're starting to warm up a bit more as that smoke clears out. So that station around Mill Creek is showing 90 degrees right now, 16% relative humidity. So current conditions on the ground are hot and dry once again, but what's been working in our favor the last few days, calm winds. The one by Mineral is 3 miles per hour, Mill Creek 6 miles per hour, the one closest towards Turner Mountain 7 miles per hour. So that's why the smoke was able to settle down overnight. And that's been the story this week so far, that it hasn't been as much wind driven as it has been driven by how dry things are and how much fuel we have. Now, the amount of fuel in the northern section, they kind of reduced that by doing a lot of firing operations up there, but there's still a lot of fuel towards Turner Mountain where we'd be expecting more growth. So for where I am expecting the large amount of growth around Turner Mountain, two things working against us: dry fuel that's abundant, and then it's also going to be going uphill, so that would promote more growth because it's able to preheat the fuels. Weather might be something that I think is the biggest question mark in the forecast. You can already see how much moisture we had August 3rd and August 4th when that kind of tropical moisture moved up. We even got a little rain on the fire, and then fire activity really picked up this week when things dried out. But now you're starting to see that moisture trend back upward. Still very dry out there, as we could see from our current weather stations, but moving in the right direction. So now let's actually get into the wildfire forecast, number 3 on this list, to see what kind of weather we can expect in the future, because that's going to be the biggest variable that will determine how this fire behaves over the next few days. So as moisture goes up, that's going to help. As temperatures, which have been quite hot over the last few days, finally start to cool down, that's going to help. Winds are going to be the biggest wild card. So in the weather forecast, the broad pattern of what's happening is we have this big high over the west, and that's what's been leading to a lot of the heat and the dry conditions the last few days, which has led to a lot of the active fire behavior, but it's also led to the lack of winds. You see those lines right there? When those lines are far apart, you're not going to have very strong winds. But watch what happens as that high moves off to the east and we have a trough moving in this weekend. So what happens is the hot, dry air moves to the east of us, so it cools down and you get more moisture, but those lines get closer together. It's almost like your atmosphere is getting steeper and your winds are going to increase. So two things working for us, one thing working against us. One of the things working for us, California towards the start of next week is going to be below average, and then it actually looks like we're shifting into a cool pattern, which is great news right there. Now, with that being said, it is still going to be, you could say, hot and dry out there over the next 2 days, still showing some mid-80s in the forecast. Relative humidity, I mean, I think it's really hard to pick the spots for where I choose these stations, because there's different parts of the fire that have different microclimates. We've already seen some of the stations on the ground with a relative humidity in the teens today, so I think we can lower those numbers, maybe lower all of these numbers in terms of humidity. Still going to be warm and dry, just not as hot and extremely dry as we have been. And then it also looks like we're going to have a better moisture recovery overnight tonight. Now notice on this, so this is today, tonight, tomorrow night. This one is showing not that much wind. It's saying 7 to 8 miles per hour. But then if we go over to windy and look at the fire, it's saying maybe 25 mile per hour gusts this afternoon. Saturday afternoon, it's saying 25 mile per hour gusts again. And then Sunday, potentially the windiest day on the fire. You see how much more widespread those gusts come, and it looks like it's from a more southerly direction. Now, I do think we can perhaps take this model with a grain of salt, though, because it's been overcalling the winds the entire last week. For example, right now it's calling for 20 mile per hour winds, and if we look at the actual stations on the ground, 7 miles per hour, 6 miles per hour, 3 miles per hour. So we have two different models here. One's saying 20 to 30 mile per hour gusts. One is saying 5 to 10 mile per hour winds. The truth is most likely somewhere in between, but it is most likely going to be windier than we have been it is going to be windier than it has been over the last few days. So the incident meteorologist, who I believe writes this report, is expecting 20 20 to 22 mile per hour winds. So that's what we're going to go with there. Again, what works in our favor though, cooling down and with a bit more moisture, especially in the overnight hours, which is going to help us out. So if I had to do my wildfire forecast, I would say not too worried about this northeastern section. Even if that were to escape, our winds are still from the southwest, so that's just going to push it into the Dixie Fire burn scar. This northern section so far looks to be holding, so I'm not too concerned about it. But I'd say that's the question mark in the forecast, because if those winds pick up, it could take some burning little embers in here, toss them out here, and then that could go into where we have dry abundant fuels. And then with windy conditions, it could make a run up there. So that's, I'd say, the number one thing I'm hoping doesn't happen in the forecast. What I'm thinking will happen is that we continue to see some growth around Turner Mountain. It's just the fact that we have that much fuel in the area. It's steep, rugged terrain, and the fire has already kind of slopped over a control line yesterday, and that's just going to be moving uphill throughout the day today. I think that's where we see the growth throughout the day today. I think the long-range forecast is going to be a difficult one because, again, what's going to determine that is the weather forecast, and there's things working for us and things working against us. And right now, 2 of our models are saying different things about what the wind's actually going to be doing. So that's just something we're going to have to watch over the next few days. But overall, if we just look at how much heat this fire is producing right now, where those little squares pop up, those always overestimate the heat. And that's not nearly as much as we've seen in previous days. Smoke right now doesn't look too bad. That's the best I'd say this has looked in a while, although we are going to see an increase as we get into this afternoon. But on top of that, we still have over 6,000 personnel on this fire, over 400 engines, over 170 dozers. They've been putting just lines all over the place. Those black X's represent all the different lines. And then on top of that, we have all the air attack as well, which is going right on that area of the fire where I am expecting some of the growth today. So some things working against us, some things working for us. Overall, I would say we're in a lot better position right now than we were even just a few days ago. And I'd say the best progress or the best news that we've had this entire week is when we turn on structures, those orange dots. You look at Mineral, still standing, Mill Creek, still standing, even some of these areas where there's only a few of those little orange dots, those all look like they're still in the clear as well. And took some bold firefighting to accomplish that so far. So California firefighters know how to do it. We're in pretty good hands, and we'll just have to watch to see what the winds do this weekend. So hopefully this video was helpful, and thanks for watching.